Welcome to Holme Horror. I've been waiting for you. Human garbage. The city of Graymoor was a crumbling labyrinth of neglected streets, soot-streaked buildings, and alleys that seemed to breed shadows. It was a place where life felt disposable, its inhabitants moving through routines with hollow gazes, weighed down by the grime of their surroundings. But even in a city so seemingly indifferent, the discovery of human body parts stuffed into garbage bags shocked everyone. The police found the first bag on a humid summer morning, torn open by scavenging rats behind a tenement block. A severed hand spilled out pale and grotesque against the filth. More followed. Limbs, torsos, and even heads turned up on curbsides and in alleyways, always hidden within black plastic bags tied neatly at the top. The killings earned the culprit a chilling nickname: the Bagman. Elias Kane lived in Graymoor's Ashdown district, a pocket of the city ignored even by its slumlord overseers. The apartment buildings were squalid, their walls streaked with mold and neglect. Elias occupied a modest unit on the third floor, a place as unremarkable as the man himself. He worked nights as a janitor at an office building downtown, his hours perfectly suited to his preference for solitude. Elias wasn't a man people noticed. His sandy hair and wire-rimmed glasses made him blend into the background, his voice quiet and unassuming. But underneath his mundane exterior lurked a mind consumed by darkness. Elias had always been fascinated by the discarded. As a child, he sifted through trash heaps, fascinated by what people chose to throw away. Broken toys, torn clothing, half-eaten food, it all told a story. But it wasn't the objects themselves that drew him. It was the idea of them being unwanted, cast aside. That fascination with abandonment evolved into something far more sinister as Elias grew older. People, he realized, were no different. They were just trash waiting to be disposed of. Elias's first kill was a homeless man who had stumbled into his path one winter night. It wasn't premeditated, just an act born of a sudden, overwhelming urge to see what it felt like to take a life. To Elias, the act was cleansing, a way of asserting control over the chaos of the world. The homeless man, nameless and forgotten, became the first in what would become a growing collection. Elias developed a methodical routine. He targeted those who lived on the fringes, runaways, drifters, and loners who wouldn't be missed. He lured them with offers of food or warmth, brought them to his basement, and ended their lives with calculated efficiency. Then, the dismemberment began. Elias worked with the precision of a surgeon, carefully separating each limb, draining the blood, and wrapping the pieces in thick plastic. The bags were tied neatly and disposed of in random locations across Graymoor. For years, Elias's work went unnoticed. The city's transient population made it easy to cover his tracks. But as more bags appeared, the media frenzy grew, and the police intensified their search for the elusive killer. Elias's carefully maintained world began to crumble the day Claire Marlowe moved into the apartment next door. Claire was everything Elias despised: vivacious, friendly, and full of life. She was in her late 20s with curly blonde hair and a laugh that seemed to carry through the thin walls of the building. She introduced herself to everyone, knocking on doors with a plate of cookies and a warm smile. When she knocked on Elias's door, he opened it a crack, his face expressionless. "Hi, I'm Claire," she said, holding out a plate. "I just moved in and thought I'd introduce myself." "Cookies?" Elias stared at her for a long moment before muttering, "Thanks," and closing the door without taking the plate. Claire's presence was a thorn in Elias's side. She hummed in the hallways, struck up conversations with neighbors, and worst of all, she tried to engage with him. Her lightness was an intrusion on the carefully maintained void of his life. The more Elias saw her, the more she gnawed at the edges of his mind. She was too bright, too vibrant, too alive. She didn't belong in Graymoor, and she certainly didn't belong in his world. Elias decided Claire would be his next victim. She had disrupted his carefully crafted existence, and removing her would restore the balance. He began studying her routine with the precision of a predator. She worked at a cafe downtown, leaving every morning at 7:30 and returning home by 5. She often stopped to chat with neighbors on her way in, her laugh ringing through the dingy halls like an unwelcome melody. Friday night seemed perfect. The weekend would provide enough distraction to cover her disappearance, and the garbage truck would collect the evidence early Saturday morning. Elias spent the week preparing. He cleaned his basement, sharpened his tools, and rehearsed the plan in his mind. By Friday evening, everything was ready. At 8 p.m., he knocked on Claire's door. "Elias," she said, surprised to see him. "What's up?" I wanted to return this," he said, holding out a measuring cup she'd lent him during a rare conversation in the hallway. Claire smiled warmly. "Thanks. You didn't have to bring it over so late. Want to come in for a bit?" Elias hesitated, but this was better than he could have hoped for. He nodded, stepping inside. Claire never saw it coming. Elias struck her with a blunt object, catching her off guard. She crumpled to the floor, unconscious. He worked quickly, binding her wrists and ankles with duct tape before dragging her limp body to the basement. The basement was Elias's sanctuary, a space meticulously arranged for his grim work. Steel tables, plastic sheeting, and a collection of sharp tools filled the room. The air was heavy with the scent of bleach and decay. He laid Claire on the table and secured her restraints. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive, for now. Elias reached for his tools, his heart pounding with anticipation, but as he prepared to make the first incision, Claire's eyes fluttered open. "Elias?" she murmured weakly, her voice thick with confusion. What are you doing?" Elias froze, startled by her sudden consciousness. He had planned for silence, for stillness, not for this. "You shouldn't have moved here," he said, his voice cold. "You don't belong here." Claire's eyes filled with terror as she realized the gravity of her situation. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You don't have to do this." But Elias had already made up his mind. Elias raised his blade, ready to silence her. But before he could make the first cut, Claire's body convulsed violently. Her back arched off the table, and a guttural sound erupted from her throat. A sound that wasn't human. Elias stumbled back, his blade clattering to the floor. Claire's eyes rolled back, revealing pure white orbs, and her body twisted in ways that defied anatomy. "You think you're the predator?" a voice hissed, though it wasn't Claire's. It was deeper, layered, and dripping with malice. "You're nothing but trash." Elias backed against the wall, his mind racing. What are you?" he stammered. Claire, or whatever she had become, sat up, the restraints snapping as if they were paper. She turned her head toward Elias, her movements jerky and unnatural. "I've been watching you," the voice continued, its tone mocking. "Do you know how many like you I've consumed?" The basement lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment. When they came back on, Claire was standing inches away from Elias, her grin unnaturally wide. "You think you're cleaning up the trash?" she sneered. "You are the trash." Elias screamed as Claire lunged at him, her hands clawing at his chest. He fought back, grabbing a wrench from the floor and swinging it wildly, but she was too strong. Her grip tightened around his throat, cutting off his screams. The last thing Elias saw was Claire's face splitting open into a grotesque, tooth-filled maw. The next morning, the garbage truck made its usual rounds through Ashdown. The driver noticed a particularly heavy bag on the curb outside Elias's building, but thought nothing of it. He tossed it into the compactor along with the rest of the city's refuse. No one in the building noticed Elias's absence. He had always been invisible, after all. Claire, however, was as cheerful as ever. She greeted her neighbors with a bright smile, her laugh ringing through the halls. But if anyone had ventured into her apartment, they might have noticed the faint smell of decay, or the black garbage bags neatly stacked in her closet, each labeled with a name. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories. And remember, be careful. I'll be watching you.